Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with a little bit of updates about the playoff talks, some new twists and turns that we want to get to because some things might be changing, or I guess not changing for the time being. It's very possible that they will not be expanding, at least in the short term, for the playoff. And then we're going to jump into the Missouri spring game. They had a very, very early spring game on Saturday, and a couple of takeaways that the guys over at SB Nation had, and also that I had from watching some of that game. And then we're going to jump into part two of Instant Impact Freshmen. There are tons of guys across the country that are either going to have to play big roles or might slowly build into a role throughout the season that I definitely want to get to, because in part one we did not even get close to covering all the guys. And then we have a Good Vibes Monday for you all. And I think today it's only fitting to talk about Aaron Donald, one of the best football players, period, that I've ever seen play. Recently retired from the NFL, so want to take you through his career, high school, into his time at Pitt, and then obviously off into his incredible NFL career. But before we jump into all of that, I want to remind you all we get a lot of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get involved and see your questions or comments on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all, because it makes this show a little bit more interactive. Get to see your name on the screen, and maybe I can answer a question that you have about the topic that I'm talking about. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Alrighty, let's jump right in. The playoff obviously has been a big topic of conversation throughout last week as they were trying to get a new revenue distribution deal into place. There were a lot of moving parts in that, a lot of different ideas being floated around the room, but they finally landed on one. And it looks like the 9 FBS conferences and Notre Dame have approved some revenue distribution models through 2031. Now, this does include a look-in clause in 2028, which we'll get to a little bit later in the segment, so that could mix up some things here in a couple of years. But overall, this is a very, very interesting topic because it has been hotly debated for a very long time, and there has been a lot of people worrying way more about the revenue aspect of things than the format. And if you're the people in that room, it's hard to argue with that approach, partly because there are a lot of conferences that need pretty much as much money as they can get their hands on right now. So they have been fighting for quite some time about the details of all of this, but it seems they finally come to an understanding. Everyone has agreed to the details of it, and if you don't recall the details from a week ago or you just didn't watch that episode, I'll break them down here real quickly. We have 29% annually go to the Big Ten and the SEC each, so each of them will get 29% of the pool. 58% will go to both those conferences together. Obviously, a big piece of the pie for those conferences. That would be about $21 million a year, it seems, per school. Then you have 17% to the ACC. Second highest or I guess third highest, but second behind the Big Ten and the SEC, around $13 million per year for schools, and then 15% going to the Big 12, $12 million each, and then 9% to the Group of Five conferences collectively. It says about $1.8 million per school, but prior to this agreement, they were distributing it kind of at their discretion, so I don't know if that's going to be continuing on into this next era of things. And then the remainder of those independents, including more than $12 million for Notre Dame and the FCS. So a very interesting diatribe of all of the different options for all of these teams and what they could possibly be taking home. One of the interesting things that has been added into this new revenue distribution model is there's additional performance benefits available only to independents for making the college football playoff field. So Notre Dame in particular would make an additional $6 million if they were to make the playoff. So that would take them right up there around the Big Ten and SEC mark, around $18 million a year. So would be a huge thing for Notre Dame, obviously, if they were able to pull that off and keeps Notre Dame right where they usually are, among the richest and most successful brands in all of college football. So they definitely have to be happy about the way things shook out, because there were a lot of people thinking they had to join a conference to get a fair cut of the pie, and they did not, very obviously. But there's been a lot of push back and forth between the Big Ten and the SEC and pretty much everyone else, especially the Group of Five. And as we talked about last week, there was not much of a choice from the Group of Five or really from the ACC and the Big Ten on this matter. It was a lot of the SEC and the Big Ten kind of just forcing their hand on the Big 12 and the ACC and the rest of the group. So there's been a little bit of, I don't want to say necessarily bad blood in these discussions. I don't think there's anyone walking out of there super surprised, but there's definitely some people that are less than excited about the way that things went and the way that things are going in this sport. And I think it's kind of summed up by a quote that was in an article by The Athletic. Stuart Mandel and Chris Favini have been doing incredible reporting on this and released an article last week about the most recent developments. And a Group of Five athletic director who was granted anonymity for discussing the negotiations said it's like playing on a football field while also being able to change the rules and penalties during the game and controlling the officials. It's simply incredibly brazen, unnecessary, and dangerous. So there is not a lot of fans of the Big Ten and the SEC right now, and I totally understand that. I think there is a certain level of, the way he put it, brazenness in the way that the Big Ten and the SEC approach these conversations, and the way I'm sure they're going to approach them for, the next couple of years as we get closer and closer to that look-in clause in 2028. So there's a lot of not too happy people in that room, but they don't belong to the SEC and the Big Ten. They got pretty much exactly what they wanted in a lot of ways. Obviously, that first round bye for their conference champions was stopped in its tracks. Excuse me. But other than that, they've been pretty much able to entirely control these conversations, and obviously it's rubbing some people the wrong way, which makes total sense. But also from the SEC and the Big Ten perspective, you have very little motivation to worry about any other conference than yourself. You see the power dynamic that is forming in college football. You see that you are sitting up top, and if you have the ability to make the decisions, it'd be really hard not to if you were in their positions. Although I wish that they would be able to put that aside and, do what's best for the sport and keeping everyone involved. But as of right now, there's not much incentive for Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that happens. But we knew about all of the revenue distribution. We knew all of this was coming, and we knew some of the specifics towards the end of last week. So one of the really new developments in this that I think is really interesting, and I wish they would have came to this conclusion earlier, is it looks like they could be putting talks on hold to expanding to 14 teams until they see the 12-team playoff play out for at least 1 year, because obviously all of this stuff has happened very quickly. First, we had the 12-team playoff in a 6+6 format. That changed to 5+7 before we saw 6+6. And then it was going to change to 14 before we saw 12. So there was going to be a lot of moving parts very, very quickly in this process. But at the end of the day, I'm very happy that they've decided, at least some of them have decided, to stay the course for the time being, see what 12 teams look like. Greg Sankey was someone that is in big favor of waiting until the end of the season to reopen these conversations and see what they want to do from there. Now, that's not to say that at the end of the season they won't still be expanding to 14 or 16 teams. I think that's almost definitely what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, we at least get them to sit back for a second and stop changing the format of something that hasn't come to be yet. So I think all of us can be okay with that and at least let the 12-team play out and see what happens. Obviously, one of the big things that has been happening throughout this time and throughout the last couple of years is the Pac-12 has been slowly being kind of squeezed out in the grand scheme of this stuff. I think Oregon State and Washington State, although they have decided they're going to operate the Pac-12 as normal for the next 2 years, They had to sign the new thing on Friday, but there is a rule by the CFP that says you have to have at least 8 teams in your conference to get an automatic berth. So both those teams are really only up for at-large bids. And I think, as some of you might know, but just to remind you, it looks like they're going to be playing Mountain West teams the majority of the year. They likely, the conference championship won't necessarily matter too much depending on whether Oregon State or Washington State wins it. It doesn't necessarily make that big of a difference. So it's hard for me to look at either of these teams and say they're going to be a big part of the new playoff, which really stinks because unless they can add some Mountain West teams and maybe be able to kind of backfill a little bit and create some type of Group of Five-esque conference, it looks like Washington State and Oregon State are going to be sitting on the outside looking in at least for the next 2 years. Bill Hancock said the same thing, who has been a big part of the college football playoff throughout this entire time. He says, as of now, it is not anticipated the Pac-12 will be a part of this in 2026. So it's very possible that these next 2 years are the last 2 chances that Oregon State and Washington State have to be even involved in these discussions if they don't, create a conference out of thin air from the Mountain West or any of the other leagues out there that they can poach teams from. And there are some strong teams in those conferences, so they could definitely put together a good conference, but they got to get moving pretty quickly, and right now they don't necessarily have a lot of pull, no matter who you're trying to call, whether it's Boise State or any of the teams up there. I don't think Oregon State and Washington State have too big of a leg to stand on as of right now. But as we talked about earlier, the big part of this is the look-in clause in 2028. I think all of us understand the way the sport is going. The SEC and the Big Ten are garnering just about as much power as anyone has in the sport pretty much ever. So there is a certain level of worry that once we get to 2028, it's not going to be, reallocating things a little bit more evenly. It's going to be pushing it more and more in the direction of the Big Ten and the SEC, mainly because the ACC and Florida State, their case is starting to come to a head. I think they were waiting for the playoff discussions to kind of settle down and let everyone kind of regroup, but I think all of that stuff is going to be happening very quickly. I think Florida State wants out as quickly as possible, obviously, and the ACC, I think, might be getting a little bit tired of fighting this fight. So I think Florida State will find their way out. I've said that a number of times. I think with enough money and enough want in college football, you can do any number of things. So the people at Florida State really want out, and the people at Florida State have plenty of money to do so. So it's hard to argue with that. I think once Florida State does it, a lot of teams will follow them, depending on what that dollar number is to get out of their grant of rights. But there are a lot of teams out there in the ACC that would go into a little bit of debt knowing that they're going to the Big Ten or the SEC, where the payouts from the media deals will be substantial and be able to cover that throughout the next couple of years and cover that deficit that they might have to take on. But all of that is for a future thing. I think the SEC and the Big Ten are getting ready to be into a bidding war, be into kind of picking up as many teams as possible, the gold rush as we have called it around here. And I think Florida State, obviously chief among them, that looks like a Big 12 or Big 10, lock at this point. I think Florida State, if they're going anywhere, it's going to be the Big 10. I think the SEC has a number of teams they'll look the way of. I think Clemson is the number one team to watch, obviously, there. I think they fit the SEC perfectly. I think a lot of things make sense from that marriage. I think Miami also could go to either one of them, but I think the SEC makes a little bit more sense. North Carolina, Virginia, there are tons of teams to watch, whether they go to the Big Ten or the SEC. It looks like they're just going to keep consolidating power, and then come 2028, I'm sure that number that they want will not be 29% annually. It will be closer to 40 or closer at least to 35, because the amount of power they could have by 2028 could be just insane compared to what they have now, even with how much everything's changing and how fast everything is consolidating. These guys are going to be able to dictate a lot of the future of college football. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that plays out and what 2028 brings us. But for the time being, we have a 12-team playoff for 2 years. we will let it play out before we get to 14. Hopefully, I think there's still some people pushing to continue talks, but hopefully they'll let it play out for 1 year, see where they're at. Then they'll likely go to 14, and in my mind, and then likely to 16. So I don't think this is necessarily going to stop anytime soon, but it is a rest stop on the playoff expansion journey. So let's enjoy it. Let's enjoy this 12-team playoff for the 1 year that we probably have it, or the 2 years at least that we have it. But let's enjoy not having to worry about it expanding too quickly and too fast, at least for the time being, it seems. So good news on the playoff front. We're one step closer to getting some real answers on what the future of college football looks like, even though it might take some time. But for right now, I think we're at a resting point, at the very least, with these playoff discussions, and we'll see when they pick them back up and if they pick them back up before the end of before the start of this next season. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk Missouri spring game. There was a very early spring game on Saturday in Columbia, Missouri, and there's some really big takeaways that I had, and I really want to jump into this because this is a team that is very dangerous in the fall if they can put a lot of things together. So stick around with us, and we will be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits, I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the updates to the college football playoff discussions. Look like expansion could be on hold, at least for the time being, out there. And now let's jump into the Missouri spring game. But before we do that, I do want to remind you all we get tons of comments and questions throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the Sports Network, but to you all to see your questions or comments on the screen. We can have a fun back and forth, and you can get more involved in the show. So definitely use that if you want to submit a question. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Let's talk some spring football. It is very early on in the spring to be talking a spring game, but Missouri did us a favor and got out on the football field a little bit early this year, and the guys over at SB Nation for Missouri, or as they call it, Rock M Nation, had some great takeaways, and I had some takeaways as well to get into some very interesting team heading into spring and heading into 2024. Obviously a huge year for Missouri, and Eli Drinkwitz in 2020 did a lot of things that people did not think they were capable of, and Brady Cook was a huge part of that. So it's only fitting that his team, the black team, won this game 10-9 on Saturday afternoon. The two touchdowns were a pass from Brady Cook to Joshua Manning, a young wide receiver that kind of broke out in this game for a 39-yard score, and then a little trickery on the second play, on the second touchdown of the day for the yellow team. It was Theo Weiss throwing a pass to Mookie Cooper, so a wide receiver to wide receiver connection there for an 82-yard touchdown. So the gold team actually went for two after they did that, and Nate Noel, the transfer from App State, got stopped at the goal line. So a 10-9 score. Obviously, these spring games, you always take everything with a grain of salt, but there were a couple of things that stood out to the guys over at SB Nation, but also to myself as I was watching this. Joshua Manning, first of all, 4 catches, 78 yards. He's walking into a very talented wide receiver room. But another guy that can rotate in is never a bad thing. Or if you want to play 4 wide receivers, it's never a bad thing. So to go with Luther Burden, who I think is the best wide receiver in the entire country, and then you have Theo Weiss and Mookie Cooper as well. Just an embarrassment of riches. If you add someone like Joshua Manning to that, it could be an absolutely ridiculous group that Brady Cook is throwing to. So it'll be very interesting to see how he develops and if he can get on the field early in 2024. And then another area that some Missouri fans were a little bit worried about going into this year, losing Enos Rackstraw and Chris Abrams-Drain, was the defensive backfield. And it looks like a couple of guys definitely stood out there. Torian Pride Jr., the transfer from Clemson, had a pick in the game, made a very athletic play on the ball, and showed what he's capable of coming over from Clemson. Absolutely huge pickup for that backfield. And then Drayden Norwood also played a very good game, had a couple of pass breakups, did a couple of really good things. So it looks like Missouri might have their 2 corners, at least for the time being, but it probably will not be, quite as strong as it was a year ago. I mean, it's hard to follow a duo that was as good as Rackstraw and Abrams-Drain was a year ago. So I think these two, as long as they can hold their own and, be competitive on every snap, I think Missouri will be more than fine. But the other side of the ball, the other backfield that everyone was a little bit worried about, Nate Noel, the guy we talked about, obviously from App State, and then Marcus Carroll, also coming over from the Sun Belt from Georgia State. Both had solid days. Obviously, when you're doing a spring game and you can't tackle, there's not much of a chance for running backs to have super gaudy numbers or anything crazy, so it's a lot of just watching how they carry the ball, the way they look, how confident they are with the ball in their hands, and both these guys looked like they looked the part. They looked like the guys that Missouri was hoping that they would get, and I think running back by committee is likely going to be the way that they go forward. It's not something that Eli Drinkwitz and company are necessarily super comfortable with. They've always been a group that has done one back that kind of carried the load. Cody Schrader obviously was that guy last year, but it looks like they're going to have to change things up a little bit, but they have 2 really good options in Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll to choose from. So very encouraging signs there from the spring game in that backfield. But maybe the biggest thing in this game was Chris McClellan, sorry about that. Chris McClellan, the Florida transfer on the defensive line, he was just absolutely disruptive all day. They did not release defensive stats, so I can't necessarily break down the exact number of tackles and that type of thing, but he was just all over the place. Every single play, you felt like whenever he was on the field, he blew something up. So he's someone that definitely keep an eye out on. We don't have exact, depth charts yet. There are some people that take whacks at it, but as of right now, it's hard to imagine Chris McClellan not being one of those starters on the defensive line come August 2024. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that develops. They definitely need some game changers with Darius Robinson leaving. They need the D-line to step up, and Chris McClellan could be a huge part of that. The O-line, the other side of the scrimmage, had a really good day for the most part. Caden Green, obviously the OU transfer that is highly touted, had a pretty much flawless day at left tackle, is an absolute beast. That is going to be a huge part of their success because protecting Brady Cook's blind spot is as important of a position as you could have on this Missouri team, because without Brady Cook, it could be tough sledding for Missouri. But another guy that stood out was Connor Tollison, a guy that's supposed to start at guard this upcoming year, a guy that kind of struggled last year but seems to be kind of turning a corner in his career possibly. And then the O-line, it's very talented, at least the top end, but not necessarily as deep as some of the people that follow Missouri very closely would like. So I think they're going to need to stay healthy. I think health is going to be a huge part of the O-line and the quarterback game, because obviously Brady Cook is what makes this go, but if the O-line gets unhealthy, it's very possible that Brady Cook could get unhealthy pretty quickly. So the hope there is the O-line can stay healthy and continue on playing the good football that they're very, very capable of playing. Another fun little nugget for Missouri fans out there is you did lose Harrison Mevis, the thicker kicker, as you used to call him around Columbia, But his replacement, Blake Craig, did not miss a kick on Saturday, looked really good. So as of right now, you got to be feeling okay. Losing a guy like Mevis is not an easy thing to replace, but it looks like you're off to a good start with Blake Craig, the sophomore. So very exciting news there because that was a huge part of their success a year ago. Mevis made a lot of big kicks in that year, and I think Missouri was a little bit worried about who was going to take over, but it looks like they're in good hands. Overall, I think this is going to be a really good team. This is a team that can make a ton of noise in an SEC where it feels like there are a ton of teams right in that second tier. You know, everyone's putting Georgia and Texas kind of up above the pack, but then there's a ton of teams that can make a lot of noise, whether you're talking about Tennessee or Ole Miss. Bama's obviously going to be a part of this picture. Missouri, tons of Kentucky, even a team that could make some noise. So there are a lot of teams in that second tier of the SEC that could be a huge part of what goes on there, and Missouri's chief among them. So I think when you look at this team, it's all about Brady Cook's health. If he can stay healthy, they'll go as far as he can take them. And then the O-line, as long as they don't suffer injuries, they should be okay. The wide receiver room is going to be incredible. The running back should be okay, again, as long as the O-line does not suffer some injuries. And then there's a lot of bounce of ball factors. There's a lot of, up in the air factors that they can't necessarily control. They will be going up against a really tough schedule, but at the end of the day, this is a very talented team that can do a number of things in 2024, and it'll be awesome to see if Eli Drinkwitz can follow up that incredible 2023 campaign with another campaign that puts Missouri even more on the map in the future of the SEC. But Missouri now will take a little bit of a break for a team as a team before they reconvene for summer workouts. Obviously, this is quite a long amount of time for these players to be on their own working out. So whether you agree with me or not, I tend to believe this is the time of year where Missouri's season will likely be decided. There are a lot of teams and a lot of players out there that likely would take this and kind of relax for a little bit, take a little bit of time off. And not to say that they shouldn't do that. They've been, working their butts off for quite some time. So definitely let your body heal, do what you got to do. But at the end of the day, the teams that really, really make their mark and make the playoff and do all the incredible things that Missouri wants to do is they work when no one's watching. They work when they don't have scheduled workouts. Brady Cook will get the wide receivers together to go through passing drills and do workouts. And this is where Missouri's season will be decided in a lot of ways, because you'll get to see what type of team they are. Are they a team that is fully ready to step into that next echelon of the SEC and of college football? Or are they kind of sit around the 8-9 win mark for a couple of years because these days that you don't have structured practices kind of go by the wayside. Now I think Missouri is not one of those teams. I think they have great leadership, especially with Brady Cook, and I think they're going to take full advantage of it. But it'll be interesting to see if we get any updates on what's going on throughout this time and if they're taking full advantage of these days off. But we have tons of other spring games coming up, so I just want to take you through the schedule real quickly here. And it starts, obviously, with Missouri, obviously, this past week. Then BYU is playing on Friday of this week, so definitely another one to follow there if you're a Big 12 fan. April 6th is when stuff really starts to heat up. We have Clemson, Auburn, NC State, and a personal favorite of mine, UNLV, who is a very interesting team to watch. Then you have April 12th, that following Friday, Kansas goes to work. So if you're a Big 12 fan, you might want to tune in to some Friday spring games. And then we have April 13th when everything goes crazy. You have Ohio State, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Utah, LSU, Penn State, Alabama, Miami, Ole Miss, and so many more. There are a million teams that are playing across the country on those days, and also April 20th. But on April 19th, that Friday, it looks like Louisville is going to have their spring game, another very interesting team coming off a huge year, so it'll be interesting to see what they bring to the table. And then that following Saturday, we have Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Texas, Texas A&M, USC, Duke, and South Carolina. Tons of teams there. the following Saturday, West Virginia, Oregon, UCLA, Arizona, and Colorado. So a lot of those new Big 12 and Big 10 teams out there on that day. And then Wisconsin and Washington wait all the way until May 2nd and 3rd to play their games. So a lot to look forward to during spring. There is going to be a lot heating up around the country soon because these spring games don't necessarily give us a ton of insight necessarily on what team we're going to get in 2024, but they give us a good bit, and at least we can get some from it. I think Missouri showed us a little bit of what they're capable of in 2024, but at the end of the day, until toe meets leather in August 31st, we don't know a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of these spring games develop, and I will definitely keep you updated on all of the takeaways as more of these happen. But definitely want to keep updated with all of the spring practices because it's a crazy time of year. But right now we're going to take a second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk instant impact freshmen. There are a ton of guys that have the ability to step onto their campus and immediately be stars for their team. So want to break down all of those guys. We did a part one quite a while ago, so definitely go check out that on the page here. But there are tons of guys that I did not get the chance to get to. So stick with us, and we will get into all of those right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Missouri spring game and some of the big takeaways there. And now let's get into some instant impact freshmen. There are a ton of players across the country that are coming out of a wildly talented 2024 recruiting class that are ready to make their mark on their teams pretty much immediately. And I think one of the guys that is chief among that list is Williams Nawari, the defensive end, defensive lineman, kind of a hybrid guy going to Missouri. He obviously has big shoes to fill with Darius Robinson leaving for the NFL. That is a position of need a little bit for Missouri. Obviously, we talked about Chris McClellan in the past segment. Him and Williams Nawari will definitely be a duo to be reckoned with. I think he could have a year sort of like what Ruben Bain had at Miami a year ago, just being a disruptor. Obviously, physically just an absolute beast, and can be definitely the number one for this pass rushing team as they kind of go into a new direction. They have a new defensive coordinator, obviously, with Blake Baker heading over to LSU. So a new attack, but at the end of the day, someone like Williams Nawari is really hard to keep off the field, and when he's on the field, he's really hard to stop from making plays. So very excited to see what he can do. Two guys that are heading out to Boulder, Colorado that pretty much need to make immediate impacts are Jordan Seaton and Jerlon Miller. Both guys that are wildly talented. Jordan Seaton, an offensive tackle, and as we know, that Colorado offensive line was less than desirable a year ago, and he will likely have the most important job on the field protecting Shedeur Sanders' blind spot. We just talked about it with Brady Cook and Caden Green. This is another guy that needs to step in and be incredible pretty much from the get-go, because if Shedeur Sanders is not protected, there is a big ceiling on this Colorado team. There is a very, very steep cutoff if they do not let him sit and kind of go through his progressions, because very obviously an incredibly talented quarterback, but there's only so much that quarterbacks can do if they're not protected correctly, and Jordan Seaton's going to be a huge part of that. He's a guy that I think can come in and make his stamp pretty quickly. Guys like Kelvin Banks at Texas and Will Campbell at LSU as freshmen came in and were pretty much incredible from the get-go. He's kind of cut from that same cloth, and as we know, Kelvin Banks and Will Campbell likely first-round picks. Will Campbell even could be the number one overall pick, depending on how the chips fall throughout the year. And then Jerlon Miller, joining an already very solid wide receiver room. You have Jimmy Horn Jr., you have Omarion Miller, and obviously Travis Hunter, the just freak athlete that makes no sense to someone like me who's a pretty average Joe guy. But He is someone that, Jerlon Miller, that being, is likely someone that will come into the games whenever Travis Hunter needs a breather. If he ever needs a breather, the dude is basically a cyborg. I don't know how he does what he does, but at the end of the day, every now and then he'll have to come off the field, and I think Jerlon Miller will be the guy that steps in for him, and when he does, I think he's going to make a lot of big plays for this team, and they're going to need him to. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think he's someone that you might not know the name now, but as Colorado, maybe if they start making a run next year, he could be a guy that is a big part of that. And then probably the biggest impact freshman in the entire country for very obvious reasons, Dylan Raiola, the quarterback over at Nebraska, someone that is wildly talented, is built like an NFL quarterback at like 6'2", 225, I think, just an absolute physical beast, can do a number of different things, has great arm strength, but at the end of the day is a freshman quarterback in the Big Ten. That is not necessarily something that usually goes well. It is something that usually results in a lot of up and down, a little bit of inconsistency, sort of what we saw from Drew Aller in his first year starting. Now, he wasn't a freshman, so that's a little bit different, but at the end of the day, first year starting in the Big Ten, it can be up and down, and I think that's likely what we'll get from Dylan Raiola. He does have a good group of wide receivers to play with. Isaiah Nayer, the Texas transfer that was just a little bit injured during his time at Texas, but was incredible at Wyoming prior to that. Then you have Malachi Coleman, the very talented sophomore, and Jamal Banks, a transfer from Wake Forest. So a good group of wide receivers, not necessarily the elite group that he's hoping to have throughout his career there, but at the end of the day, plenty of guys that can make a number of plays. His O-line is going to be the big thing. These young players, at the end of the day, if you can give them time, there are plenty of talented kids that can play really, really good football from the get-go. But at the end of the day, if he doesn't have time, things get really ugly really quickly. So if his O-line can be good, if they can be stout, at least to start the season and kind of get him more comfortable, get him a little bit of confidence, I think he's someone that could absolutely light it up and possibly upset a team here and there because the talent is off the charts. I don't think that's up for debate, but the O-line on Nebraska's team is a little bit porous, has been a little bit iffy at times for sure, and I think it'll be interesting to see if they have totally fixed that or there's still some holes there, and Dylan Raiola has to fight uphill a little bit more than he probably should have to, but he'll be probably the person that everyone's watching the most because stepping into that role as the prodigal son returning, the guy that is supposed to save the entire program is quite the shoes to step into. But at the end of the day, uber talented, is definitely capable of doing it. It'll just take some time, I think. But let's move right on here. We have Justin Williams, a linebacker that is going to UGA, and as we know, Georgia and linebackers just make sense. They are the two that go together about as good as any position with any school. They've had a number of guys walk through there and be just remarkable players at that position at Georgia and then at the next level. Jarvis Jones, way back in 2012, that type of era, and then you got Nakobe Dean, you got even Jamon Dumas-Johnson that left to go to Kentucky because of some of the guys in this room right now. Roquan Smith is the obvious one that is absolutely tearing it up on the Ravens now, but there are tons of guys in this room that are very talented. CJ Allen, Raylan Wilson, Smile Munden, remarkable talent in this linebacker room. Of course there always is, but Justin Williams is going to be really, really hard to keep off the field. He is incredibly athletic, is a sideline-to-sideline linebacker, and I think he's someone kind of like CJ Allen last year where it might start a little bit slow. He might not play a ton of snaps in week 1, 2, 3, but as the season goes on, as he gets more comfortable and as he kind of builds out his body a little bit more, gets a little bit bigger, I think he'll start to get even more playing time and he'll be a big part of this defense, especially if, there's an injury there. Hopefully that does not happen, of course, but if there is, Justin Williams will be ready to roll, and I'm sure there will be a number of Georgia fans that will absolutely love this kid whenever he steps on the field. Another guy that is coming in to an SEC school that needs to make a difference very quickly is Dylan Stewart. South Carolina has been going through a little bit of a tough time in the last 365 days. They had a great year in 2022, took a step back in 2023, and with Spencer Rattler heading off to the NFL, there is some thoughts that they'll take another step back in 2024, but Dylan Stewart could be a huge reason that doesn't happen. They need a game changer on defense, and he could absolutely be that guy. Xavier McLeod heading over to UGA is a huge loss, and they're going to need people to step up across that defensive line. Obviously, Dylan Stewart coming off the edge, Xavier McLeod more of an inside guy, so a little bit different of a skill set, but at the end of the day, you need to replace guys across the defensive line. You need people to step up, and Dylan Stewart is as talented of a player as they have on that entire defense. So it'll be very interesting to see if he can blow up. I think South Carolina is a team that a lot of teams in the SEC will likely overlook when they shouldn't. And Dylan Stewart, if South Carolina is going to play spoiler, which I definitely think they could, I think Dylan Stewart could have his fingerprints all over those games. So it'll be very interesting to see how he develops. I think he's someone, again, like Ruben Bain at Miami, that as a freshman could absolutely burst onto the scene and make a huge difference for his team. And then going to a team that might not even need this guy, but he's just too good to keep off the field, much like Justin Williams at UGA. Ryan Wingo, a wide receiver heading over to Texas this year. The Texas wide receiver room is a ton of speed. They have added just insane amounts of track speed to that team. Ryan Wingo is kind of the changeup of the group. He can obviously still run. He's still got some speed about him, but is a bigger body type, gives them a little bit more of a red zone target type guy. And I think that's likely where he'll be used, at least early in the season, the majority of the time. And then slowly, I think his role will be built out. It looks like he has been very, very impressive throughout winter conditioning. I think he's someone that when August 31st rolls around and they play their first game against, I believe, ULM, I think it's going to be really hard to have Ryan Wingo not be the guy that trots out with the first team as a freshman with Jonte Cook and Isaiah Bond, because this dude is wildly talented, and you need a big body among the group that they have that is all speed and not necessarily a lot of physicality. You need to add some physicality into that room, and I think Ryan Wingo brings that. So a huge pickup for Texas. I think he's someone that you might not be thinking about when you think about the Texas wide receivers, but you will be very, very soon. Another wide receiver that needs to step up is TJ Moore, who is heading to Clemson. They also got Sammy Brown, who is a linebacker, going that way. So two guys that could be absolutely huge for Clemson this upcoming year. TJ Moore needs to be a dude because this Clemson wide receiver room is not necessarily quite as talented as they want it to be. There has been some not so great seasons after, having remarkable talent pretty much across that room for the past what feels like a decade over at Clemson. Slowly it's kind of tapered off at that position, but TJ Moore could be a huge reason they find their way back there. With Bo Collins heading to Notre Dame, his role becomes that much more important. And then Sammy Brown, if we're not talking about UGA and linebackers, Clemson is a close second because they have a number of really good guys, most recently Trenton Simpson and James Skalski, both guys that were just incredible. I think Sammy Brown will be no different coming from Parkview High School here in Georgia. I think he's someone that can make an absolute difference and be a huge piece for this Tigers defense in 2024. Another guy that is going to be a huge piece of his defense is Elijah Rushing, the edge rusher going to Oregon. And then on the other side of the ball for Oregon, you have Gatlin Bair heading over at wide receiver. Gatlin Bair is just speed. He can absolutely go, and he's someone that is going into a room with Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, so tons of guys to get the ball to, but Gatlin Bair is one of those guys that you toss the ball out on a screen and then just watch him fly for 80 yards and a touchdown. So I think he's someone that's going to be hard to keep off the field because when you get the ball in his hands, he could score from literally anywhere on the field. So it'll be interesting to see him step up. And then Elijah Rushing, we talked about last week. Oregon's edge rushing has been a little bit lackluster over the last couple of years since Dan Lanning took over. This is hopefully the year they can turn the corner, and I think Elijah Rushing could be a huge part of that along with Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele. I think all of those guys are going to play a big part, but Jordan Burch has yet to hit his ceiling that a lot of people had for him when he was at South Carolina and then when he transferred over to Oregon. And I think rushing could be right there if Jordan Burch tends to fall short again this year. But at the end of the day, a very talented room. I think Elijah Rushing will be sort of a third down guy to rush the passer, but he could make a lot of big-time plays for Oregon in their quest for a Big Ten and then national title because this is a very, very talented team, and Elijah Rushing will play a huge part in what they can do in 2024. And then finally, a guy that is in a remarkably good situation is Dominic McKinley, the defensive lineman heading to LSU. He's someone that was committed to Texas A&M before reconsidering and going to LSU, and I think he made the right decision. Obviously, losing Mason Smith from LSU is absolutely huge. But adding Bo Davis as your D-line coach is, I think, a trade that LSU fans would make 10 times out of 10. One of the best developers in the game, one of the best position coaches in the game, and a guy that did incredible things with T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy while at Texas. So a guy that you got to love having, and Dominic McKinley could be his next big project, an absolute beast on the inside, and could be an absolute difference maker very, very quickly. The SEC, obviously, is going to be very physical. You're going to have some battles at the line of scrimmage, but Dominic McKinley with Bo Davis teaching him the ways, I think it's a mean thing that definitely could wreak havoc on a lot of SEC offenses, especially on the interior of that offensive line. So very excited to see what this kid can do, an absolute game changer that he has someone like Bo Davis to teach him the ropes and get him as fastly up to speed as possible. So very excited to see all those freshmen. That does not even crack the list of all the guys that are going to pop up. So if you have any guys that you think are going to break onto the scene in 2024 as freshmen, definitely drop them in the comments, and I will get to them in the next segment of this. But for now, we are going to take our final break, and when we come back, we have a Good Vibes Monday, and we're going to talk about one of the legends of the game, not only college football, but also the NFL. Aaron Donald recently announced his retirement and just wanted to take you through his career, just how remarkable it was and how ridiculous of a player he was. So definitely stick around, and we will be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the instant impact freshmen that could be coming into school and absolutely bursting onto the scene in 2024 as freshmen, but now it's time to get into some Good Vibes Monday, and I think now is the perfect time to talk about one of the guys that absolutely tore apart college football, tore apart the NFL, did about everything you could possibly ask from a defensive tackle in Aaron Donald. He is one of the best players that I have ever seen play football, period. It does not matter position. It does not matter importance. This guy was just absolutely dominant throughout his 10 years in the NFL, and even before that, throughout his time at Pitt. So let's go through his kind of journey throughout his career because it is an absolute incredible one. First of all, to start, he was a 3-star prospect out of the 2010 class, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He only had 4 offers. They were from Akron, Toledo, Rutgers, and Pittsburgh, according to Rivals. So not a lot of fantastic choices to choose from. Obviously, if people had to redo it, I think Alabama and Florida and all of the big-time teams around that time would have been knocking on his door, but at the end of the day, he went a little bit under the radar. And he's someone that decided to stay home and be a Pitt Panther. And he became a legend essentially right when he enrolled and right when he walked onto campus. His freshman year was a little bit slower than the following years, but in his sophomore year, he burst onto the scene. 11 sacks his sophomore year. He continued to grow and be one of the best players in the ACC, one of the best players in the entire country. So, excuse me, I apologize. For his junior year, he had a remarkable year, obviously. He had 64 total tackles, 5.5 sacks, 18.5 tackles for loss. Just an absolute beast up front. But then his senior year was just ridiculous in every sense of the word. 59 tackles total, 28.5 for tackles for loss, 11 sacks throughout the year in 13 games. So he was just all over the place. And from a defensive tackle, 11 sacks in 13 games is mind-boggling, to be totally honest. So 2013, as you can imagine, came with a lot of awards. And this is going to take a minute, so stick with me. ACC Defensive Player of the Year, the Outland Trophy, so the best interior lineman, offensive or defensive in the country. The Bronco Nagurski Award, the most outstanding defensive player in the year. Chuck Bednarik Award, Defensive Player of the Year. Outland Trophy Award winner, like we just talked about. Lombardi Award winner, most outstanding lineman or linebacker. This dude was just all over the place. He had probably a million trophies coming in the mail around 2013, and he earned them all. He was just an absolute beast, was an All-American a number of years, and just dominated during his time at Pitt and really put himself on the map, coming from having only 4 offers to being the 13th overall pick to the St. Louis Rams. And that might sound a little bit weird to anyone that is a little bit younger, but in his second season, they would move to their now home in LA, and the legend started right when he walked on the field. This dude was Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2024 while in St. Louis with the Rams, and then just continued rolling, really. He did not stop even for a minor pit stop in his career. He was a 10-time Pro Bowler, so every single year of his NFL career, 8-time first-team Pro Bowlers, or All-Pros, is just insane over a 10-year career. He went a 7-year stretch from 2015 to 2021 where he did not miss the first-team All-Pros once. I can't fathom that. And then obviously a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year in 2017, 2018, and 2020. The dude is just ridiculous. There has not been a year where you have not turned on the Rams, and he has not stood out. And it's for a number of reasons. I think all of us have seen countless shots of him getting either doubled or somehow triple teamed on plays because that's who he is. If you single team him, he's going to win. It's really that simple. It is a J.J. Watt type conundrum where you cannot leave him alone in any matchup, even if it's against the tackle. You can't even leave him alone in a double team. He somehow beats double teams like they're nothing. So it's just insane to see what we saw throughout his career with the Rams. He did just about everything you could possibly want to do in a football career, especially from the defensive tackle perspective. I think there are a lot of people that would tell you this is the best defensive player of all time. I still tend to go Lawrence Taylor. I think there's something about him that was just different than everyone else. But at the end of the day, if anyone had an argument for it, Aaron Donald has about as good an argument as really anyone. I think J.J. Watt's another guy that gets into that conversation, but I think J.J. Watt might even tell you that Aaron Donald was better than him. So there's tons to like about this guy. He obviously is a fantastic football player, was incredible on the field, but has been incredible off the field. He's been someone that has rarely gotten into any type of big-time trouble, has always kind of just been about football and came into work every day, and I'm sure Sean McVay and the company over at the Rams just absolutely loved him for that. He's someone that was really as important as you can possibly be at the defensive tackle position. He was someone that you would be lining up who you think is going to win every week, and you think, well, Aaron Donald's going to make a couple of ridiculous plays, so maybe the Rams can pull off some games that in the past, before 2020 when they went absolutely crazy, that they probably would have lost. He was a big part of the reason that they did not in those scenarios. But let's go through his career stats because they're just bonkers over a 10-year career. I just don't get it. But he had 543 tackles, so about 54 a year, just insane. 111 sacks throughout his career, 24 forced fumbles with 7 recoveries, and then 21 pass deflections, which is really incredible for someone that coming into the league was a little bit undersized, is definitely on the shorter side for a defensive tackle, but at the end of the day, did not impede his ability to do really anything on the football field. So that was not remotely a problem. He obviously had some really remarkable moments throughout his career. Chief among them, I think the one that he cherishes the most is winning the Lombardi Trophy in 2021 over the Bengals. Just in a remarkable game by him, 2 sacks, was dominating force all day, including the final play where Joe Burrow on a 4th down was just blown up essentially by Aaron Donald and finished off that game. So he had his fingerprints all over that one. If Cooper Kupp did not have the remarkable game that he had, I think Aaron Donald would likely have won the Super Bowl MVP there. I'm sure there are some people that argue he should have, but at the end of the day, I think he's more than fine just being a Super Bowl champion. But his career is, in my opinion, pretty much as close to perfect as you can possibly get it. Obviously, you want to win as many titles as possible, but you dominated, you go to your hometown school in Pitt after being kind of under-recruited. You dominate for 4 years, get drafted high, dominate for 10 more years at the highest level, do everything that you can possibly do, essentially. Very few things were left on the table in this career. And then you retire at the top of your game, and you get to go enjoy your life. You get to go enjoy your family and do all the things that I'm sure he was kind of not being held back from doing, but there's a lot more time for him to kind of enjoy all the things around him outside of football more now. And I think this is something, obviously, that has been in talks since they won the Super Bowl in 2021. There were rumors, and I thought this was some interesting timing for sure from his perspective, but at the end of the day, there's no there's no real right time to walk away from the game, but also there's no wrong time. Whenever those players feel like it's time for them to hang him up, they should hang him up and, walk off into the sunset, and it looks like that's what Aaron Donald's doing. But the good news for us is we will definitely be able to see him again throughout. I'm sure he'll be at a number of Rams games throughout the next couple of years. But then in 5 years, he has an appointment at Canton, Ohio, because this guy is going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer in the NFL, and it's not even a question. I don't think there should be any debate. I think they should literally look at his name, everyone should check the box, and they should move right on, because this is one of the most disruptive, one of the most dominant, one of the most remarkable players that I have ever seen in a position where, I'll be totally honest, I am no expert when it comes to defensive tackles, but when he's on the field, it's obvious that he is just absolutely different than everyone else. That is why we get those incredibly ridiculous pictures of triple teams on a defensive tackle. So he's someone that Canton's just waiting for. I'm sure the bust is starting to be made right this second, because he's definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer. He is definitely someone that has stamped his put his stamp on NFL history and did just about everything you could possibly want to do in a career, all the way from winning Defensive Rookie of the Year to winning a title. So incredible career from him, someone that defined the NFL in so many ways over the last decade, but also defined college football during his time at Pitt, and became one of the Pitt legends, and there's a lot of them. I mean, between Larry Fitzgerald and Tony Dorsett and all of these incredible players that came through Pitt, he is right up there with them, and he might be chief among them. So just a remarkable player, and someone that I'm going to miss watching on Sundays, I won't lie, but more power to him. Hope he has a remarkable retirement as he had a remarkable career, and enjoys this time where he gets to finally sit back and take a little bit of a break. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference for us here at the channel. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or X, TikTok, Instagram, for all of the content and updates. We have so many people doing remarkable work across pretty much every single sport you could think of. It is tournament time in college basketball, so my guy Nelson over at the Basketball Podcast will absolutely get you squared away there if you want some sleepers, if you want some picks for this crazy time in March that we all love so much. So while he does that, I will keep you up to date on everything happening in college football. So definitely tune in tomorrow. We will have another great show for you today, but I'll see you then.
Let's go.